The slap echoed across the manicured lawn like a gunshot. Everyone froze. Workers dropped their tools. Guests at the glass-fronted banquet hall turned. Even the birds scattered from the jacaranda trees. In the center of it all stood an old groundskeeper in faded green overalls, his cap knocked to the ground, his face turned slightly to the side from the force of the blow. The man who slapped him was young, sharp-suited, and angry. His name was Marcus Hale, and he was one of the most feared executives at Kingsbridge Holdings. "You useless old man," Marcus snapped, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Do you know how much this event costs per minute? And you dare block the entrance with your filthy wheelbarrow." The groundskeeper did not shout back. He did not raise his hands. He simply bent slowly, picked up his cap, and dusted it with calm fingers. His eyes lifted, dark and steady, not angry, not afraid. Just watching. A hush spread through the crowd as security rushed forward. "Remove him," Marcus barked. "Fire him. I don't ever want to see this man on company property again." The head of security hesitated. Because at that exact moment, a black luxury SUV rolled through the gates. The driver jumped out first, panic on his face. He rushed to the back door and opened it wide. A woman stepped out, dressed in an elegant navy suit, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Her eyes moved from the slapped groundskeeper to Marcus Hale to the frozen crowd. Then she said the words that cracked the day in half. "Marcus, why did you just assault the CEO of this company?" Silence fell like a curse. Marcus laughed once, sharp and confused. "What kind of joke is this?" The woman did not laugh back. The groundskeeper slowly straightened his back. And that was when the past came rushing in. Long before the slap, before the suits, before the glass towers and polished lawns, there was a village in southern Georgia where the red earth stained your shoes and respect mattered more than titles. The boy who would one day wear those faded overalls was named Elijah Moore. Elijah was not born into wealth. His mother sold vegetables by the roadside. His father repaired broken radios and prayed over every meal. They taught him two things that stayed with him forever: watch people when they think no one important is looking, and never announce your strength before it is needed. Elijah was brilliant but quiet. While others chased noise, he chased understanding. He fixed engines by 12, built his first irrigation system from scrap metal by 16. When a storm destroyed half the village farms, it was Elijah's design that saved the harvest. Yet when investors came scouting for talent, they spoke only to the loudest men. Elijah stood at the back, listening. He learned early that power often wears arrogance, and wisdom often wears dust. Years later, after scholarships, betrayals, lost partners, and one company that collapsed because he trusted the wrong friend, Elijah built Kingsbridge Holdings from the ground up. Infrastructure, energy, agriculture, billions in valuation. But success showed him something ugly. People stopped telling the truth around him. Employees smiled too wide. Executives hid mistakes. Everyone spoke carefully, afraid of losing favor. Elijah remembered his father's words and felt a deep unease. So he did something no one expected. He disappeared. Officially, the board announced that Elijah Moore had stepped back due to health concerns. A new executive leadership team took over daily operations. Marcus Hale rose fast in that system. Young, ruthless, obsessed with appearances. What no one knew was that Elijah never left. He shaved his beard, bent his posture, pulled on old clothes, and applied under a false name for a groundskeeping job at the Kingsbridge estate, where the company hosted its biggest events. No one checked too closely. Why would they? To them, he was just another old man with dirt under his nails. From that quiet corner of the company, Elijah watched everything. He watched managers scream at cleaners for small mistakes. He watched executives steal credit from interns. He watched Marcus Hale humiliate staff in meetings, mocking accents, laughing at those who could not fight back. And he watched the board look away, because profits were rising. Every morning, Elijah trimmed hedges and listened. Every afternoon, He swept paths and learned who lied, who cheated, and who still carried integrity in their hearts. Some workers greeted him kindly, most ignored him, a few mocked him. Marcus was the worst. "Hey, old timer," Marcus would say whenever cameras were around. "Careful with that mower. Don't want you suing us if you fall asleep standing up." Laughter followed. Elijah always smiled softly and kept working. He was not weak. He was waiting. The day of the slap was the day Kingsbridge hosted its global expansion gala. Investors flew in from New York, Lagos, London. Press lined the walkways. The lawn had to be perfect. Elijah's wheelbarrow had a broken wheel. It jammed near the entrance. He was fixing it when Marcus stormed out, furious about a delayed sound check. That was when Marcus lost his temper. That was when he slapped a man he thought was nothing. And now, as the woman in the navy suit stood beside the SUV, her words still hanging in the air, Marcus's smile faded. "Elijah Moore died years ago," Marcus said stiffly. "Everyone knows that." The woman stepped aside. Another man exited the vehicle, older, gray-haired, carrying a leather folder. "Actually," he said calmly, "Mr. Moore never died. He stepped back, and today he returns." Security looked at Elijah. The groundskeeper. The old man who swept their floors. Elijah removed his cap, straightened his shoulders, and met Marcus Hale's eyes. Before anyone could speak, sirens sounded at the gate. And Elijah said quietly, "This meeting is just beginning." The crowd leaned in. Because whatever was about to happen next was going to change every life on that lawn forever. The sirens grew louder, not from police cars, but from the escort motorcycles clearing the road outside the estate. Guests whispered. Phones came out. The moment had slipped out of Marcus Hale's control, and everyone could feel it. Elijah Moore did not raise his voice. He did not announce himself again. He simply handed his cap to the woman in the navy suit. "Thank you, Denise," he said softly. The name alone sent another ripple through the crowd. Denise Carter was not just any executive assistant. She was the longest-serving board secretary at Kingsbridge Holdings. She had been with the company from the very first loan document Elijah had signed. Marcus swallowed hard. "Sir," Marcus said quickly, forcing a laugh, "this is clearly a misunderstanding. We can step inside and clear this up." Elijah looked at him the way a father looks at a child who has already chosen the wrong path. "No," Elijah replied. "We will clear it up right here." He turned to the head of security. "Stand down. No one is being removed today." Security obeyed immediately. That was the moment many people understood something was very wrong. Elijah walked slowly toward the banquet hall entrance. With each step, he seemed taller, stronger. The hunched posture faded. The quiet groundskeeper vanished. Inside the hall, the air conditioning hummed. Crystal glasses clinked nervously. Investors sat frozen as Elijah took the stage without invitation. "For months," Elijah began, "I have worked on these grounds. I swept your paths. I cleaned your spills. I listened." His voice was calm, but it carried. "I listened to how people spoke when they thought power could not hear them." He looked directly at Marcus. "I watched how leadership treated those they believed had no value." Murmurs spread. Elijah gestured toward the back of the hall. "Bring them in." Side doors opened. Groundskeepers, cleaners, catering staff, interns. Dozens of workers filed in, confused but curious. "These," Elijah said, "are the foundation of Kingsbridge, yet many of you do not know their names." He paused. "I know their names." One by one he called them out, not rushed, not dramatic, just precise, eyes widened. Some workers fought tears. Marcus's face drained of color. Elijah turned back to the crowd. This company was built on dignity. Somewhere along the way, that was replaced with arrogance. He nodded to Denise. She opened the leather folder. "Before today," Elijah continued, "I authorized a full internal audit. Financial conduct, workplace behavior, recorded testimonies." Marcus stepped forward. "This is outrageous. You cannot blindside leadership like this. Elijah finally raised his voice. You slapped me because you thought I was nothing. The room went silent. That slap, Elijah said, was not just for me. It was for every person you have humiliated behind closed doors. Denise began projecting files onto the large screen behind them. Emails. Recordings, dates, names. Marcus recognized his own voice on one of the recordings. Laughter echoed from the speakers, his laughter. The board members shifted in their seats. Elijah turned to them. You saw prophets and chose silence. Today, silence ends. One board member stood. Mr. Moore, with respect, this could destroy investor confidence. Elijah nodded. So can rot. He faced the crowd again. Kingsbridge will survive because truth is cheaper than lies in the long run. Security guards moved toward Marcus now, but Elijah raised a hand. No, he said. Let him stand. Marcus's jaw tightened. You think embarrassing me makes you righteous. You hid like a coward. Elijah smiled sadly. I hid to see who you really were. He stepped closer, and you showed me. Marcus laughed, but it sounded hollow. You're old, out of touch. This world runs on pressure. Elijah leaned in, voice low. Pressure reveals character. Denise whispered something into Elijah's ear. He nodded. Marcus Hale, Elijah announced. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending investigation. Gasps filled the hall. Marcus snapped. You can't do this alone. Elijah looked at the board. Vote. Hands rose slowly, one by one. The decision was unanimous. Marcus staggered back as if struck. Security escorted him away, not roughly, but firmly. As Marcus passed the workers at the back, some looked away. Others met his eyes, not with hatred, with quiet judgment. When the doors closed behind him, Elijah exhaled. This is not revenge, he said. This is repair. He turned to the staff. Those who have been mistreated will be heard. Promotions will be reviewed. Salaries adjusted. A woman in catering began to cry openly. Elijah nodded to her. You matter. Applause broke out, slow at first, then thunderous. But Elijah raised his hand again. This is only the beginning. He looked out over the crowd, eyes steady. Because systems do not change overnight, people must choose to change. He stepped down from the stage. As guests buzzed and workers gathered around one another, Denise leaned close. There's something else, she said quietly. Marcus wasn't acting alone. Elijah's eyes darkened. Who? He asked. Denise slid another file into his hand. Elijah read the name. And for the first time that day, his calm cracked. Because the betrayal went deeper than he imagined. And the next move would shake Kingsbridge to its core. The name on the file burned in Elijah Moore's hands. Caleb Wright. A board member. One of the first men Elijah had trusted when Kingsbridge was nothing but blueprints and borrowed hope. Elijah closed the folder slowly. Around him, the gala continued in a strange half-life. Music played softly, too polite to stop. Guests pretended to sip drinks while stealing glances. Staff clustered together, whispering. Denise watched Elijah carefully. I wanted you to know before it goes public, she said. Marcus was the mouth, Caleb was the shield. Elijah nodded once. How long? Almost 3 years. 3 years of quiet sabotage. 3 years of poisoned culture protected from above. Elijah handed the folder back. Do nothing yet. Denise hesitated. Sir. Let me finish watching, Elijah said. That night the estate emptied slowly. Cars rolled out. Lights dimmed. By midnight, only security and night staff remained. Elijah changed back into his overalls and walked the grounds alone, the grass still bruised where hundreds of feet had stood. He knelt near the fountain Marcus used to boast beside. The stone edge was cracked, poor maintenance, oversight hidden by polish. Kingsbridge had grown fast, too fast. Elijah realized something painful. He had not just stepped back, he had abandoned vigilance. The next morning, news outlets exploded. CEO reveals himself after groundskeeper assault. Kingsbridge scandal shocks investors. Executive suspended after viral gala incident. Phones rang nonstop at headquarters. Stock prices dipped, then steadied. The public reaction surprised many. People were not angry. They were relieved. Messages poured in from former employees, contractors, janitors, interns. Stories of humiliation, of threats, of silence. Elijah read every one. He spent the next week moving quietly through departments, no longer disguised, but not announcing his presence either. Some recognized him immediately. Others didn't, until it was too late to pretend. In procurement, he watched a manager berate a young woman for a typo. Elijah waited until the man finished. Then asked, "What's her name?" The manager blinked. "Sir." "What is her name?" The man stammered. The woman answered for herself. Elijah thanked her and left. That manager was removed 2 days later. In logistics, he watched 2 supervisors argue over credit for a project. Elijah listened, took notes, left. Truth surfaced when power listened instead of spoke. But Caleb Wright stayed distant. Board meetings were tense. Caleb smiled, voted carefully, spoke of stability and optics. He never mentioned Marcus, never mentioned the slap. He sent Elijah polite emails, requested private meetings. Elijah declined them all. Instead, Elijah requested something else. A full leadership retreat. 3 days, mandatory, off-site, no press. Caleb supported the idea publicly. Privately, his jaw tightened. The retreat was held at an old conference lodge outside Savannah, surrounded by pine trees and long dirt roads. No luxury, no distractions. On the first night, Elijah spoke little. He let others talk. On the second day, he divided leadership into groups, gave them case studies, hypotheticals, moral dilemmas disguised as business problems. Who would you fire to protect profits? Who would you promote if no one was watching? Who would you believe when accusations came from the bottom? Elijah watched who rushed to answer. And who paused. Caleb answered smoothly, always strategically, never emotionally. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Elijah asked everyone to gather by the fire pit. "I want to tell you a story," he said. They listened. "It's about a man who built a house," Elijah continued. "He trusted one caretaker with the keys while he traveled. When he returned, the walls were still standing, but the foundation was rotting." Caleb shifted slightly. "The caretaker said, 'Look, the house still shines.' But when the owner pressed the walls, they crumbled." Elijah looked directly at Caleb. "The caretaker didn't swing the hammer," Elijah said, "but he handed it to someone else." The fire cracked loudly. No one spoke. That night, Caleb called his lawyer. On the final day, Elijah made his move. He asked Denise to distribute sealed envelopes to each leader. Inside were anonymous testimonies, real ones, from people they supervised. Faces changed as envelopes opened. Hands trembled. Caleb opened his last. Inside was a transcript. A recorded call between Caleb and Marcus, discussing how to manage complaints by burying them under paperwork. Caleb stood up slowly. "This is out of context," he said. "You're making a mistake, Elijah." Elijah stood too. "No," he replied. "I made the mistake years ago when I trusted you blindly." Caleb's voice hardened. "You need me. Investors trust me." Elijah nodded. They trusted Marcus too. Security entered quietly. Caleb laughed bitterly. "You think this ends well. You expose rot and the whole tree shakes." Elijah held his gaze. "Then we replant." Caleb was escorted out. But the damage did not end there. That evening, Denise brought new information. Caleb had moved money, quietly, through shell companies, not enough to trigger alarms before, enough to hurt now. And worse, he had allies outside Kingsbridge. People who did not care about dignity. People who cared about leverage. Elijah stood at the lodge window, staring into the dark forest. He had wanted reform. He had uncovered war. The question was no longer whether Kingsbridge would change. It was whether it would survive what came next. The first attack came quietly. No protests, no shouting, no headlines screaming scandal. Just numbers. On a cold Monday morning, Kingsbridge's stock dropped 8% in the first hour of trading. Analysts blamed investor uncertainty. By noon, 3 major partners paused contracts. By evening, a federal inquiry request landed on Elijah's desk, thinly veiled as a routine review. Elijah stared at the documents without panic. This was Caleb's shadow at work. Denise stood across from him, arms folded tightly. Someone is feeding regulators selective information, twisted information. Elijah nodded. Not illegal enough to be false, just sharp enough to cut. Inside Kingsbridge, fear crept back in. Employees whispered. Managers tightened their grip. Some leaders who had smiled at the retreat now avoided eye contact. That was how Elijah knew the test had begun. He called an emergency town hall. No stage, no lights. Just a wide, open warehouse floor where Kingsbridge had once assembled its first agricultural units. Hundreds of employees gathered, unsure. Elijah stood among them, not above them. "I won't lie to you," he said. "We are under attack." A murmur ran through the crowd. "Not because we failed," he continued, "but because we refused to stay quiet." He explained the investigations, the financial pressure, the risk. Then he said something no CEO was expected to say. "If this becomes too heavy," Elijah said, "you are free to leave, with references, with support." Silence. Then a young engineer raised her hand. "If we stay, will you protect us?" Elijah met her eyes. "With everything I have." People nodded, some cried, no one walked out. Outside Kingsbridge, the pressure increased. A former employee appeared on television, accusing the company of discrimination. The story spread fast. Elijah watched the interview carefully. The man was lying. But his pain was real. "He was ignored for years," Denise said quietly, "even before Marcus." Elijah sighed. "Then we failed him too." Instead of issuing denials, Elijah did something unexpected. He invited the man to speak privately. They met in a small conference room. No cameras, no lawyers. The man shouted at first, accused, blamed. Elijah listened. When the man finished, breathing hard, Elijah said, "You deserved better." The man froze. "I can't undo the past," Elijah continued, "but I can make sure no one else lives it." 2 days later, the man went back on television. This time, he told the whole truth. The narrative began to shift. But Caleb's allies pushed harder. Anonymous blogs accused Elijah of staging the groundskeeper incident for publicity. Old photos surfaced, half-truths, edited clips. Someone leaked Elijah's medical records from years ago, hinting at weakness. The board grew restless. One night, Denise came in pale. "There's a vote forming," she said, "to force you to step aside temporarily." Elijah leaned back in his chair. "How many?" "Enough to scare investors." Elijah closed his eyes briefly. That night, he walked the grounds again. Not as a groundskeeper. As a man carrying the weight of every decision he had delayed. He stopped near the old maintenance shed, where years earlier he had fixed a broken sprinkler under the moonlight. A security guard approached hesitantly. "Sir, are you all right?" Elijah smiled faintly. "I've been worse." The next morning, Elijah made a move no one expected. He opened Kingsbridge's internal records. Not to regulators. To the public. Every salary band, every promotion metric, every complaint resolution process, transparent, exposed. The media exploded. Some called it reckless. Others called it revolutionary. Investors panicked. Then something strange happened. Applications flooded in. Talented people, ethical leaders, professionals tired of closed systems. Clients who had paused contracts quietly returned. Caleb's allies began to fracture. But desperation breeds danger. Late one evening, as Elijah was leaving the office, a black sedan followed him for 3 blocks. Then 4. Denise noticed first. "We're being tailed." The sedan sped up. Elijah's driver turned sharply onto a side street. The sedan followed. Heartbeats tightened. Then sirens. Police cars appeared from nowhere, boxing the sedan in. The driver was arrested. Inside the car were documents, stolen Kingsbridge files, and a burner phone linked directly to one of Caleb's known partners. This was no longer corporate warfare. It was criminal. The next board meeting was explosive. Elijah laid everything out: evidence, timelines, names. Some board members looked sick, others angry. One stood up. "You're tearing this company apart." Elijah replied calmly, "No, I'm cutting out what would have killed it." The vote came. Elijah won. Barely. As the meeting ended, Denise leaned close. "Caleb has gone underground." Elijah nodded. "Then he's afraid." Denise hesitated. "Sir, what if this costs you everything?" Elijah looked around the room, where Kingsbridge had once been imagined. "Then at least it will cost me honestly." But far away, in a quiet office with the lights off, Caleb Wright watched the news silently. He smiled and made a call. "Phase 2, he said. And somewhere deep inside Kingsbridge, a door quietly unlocked. The breach was discovered at dawn. An automated alert flashed across Kingsbridge's internal network, flagged as a routine anomaly. Under normal circumstances, it would have been reviewed by mid-level IT staff and filed away. But this time, Elijah was already awake. He sat alone in his office, lights off, watching the city breathe through the windows. When the alert reached him, he read it twice, then stood up slowly. "They didn't unlock a door," he said quietly into the phone. "They opened a tunnel." By sunrise, the executive floor buzzed with tension. Screens glowed with data streams. IT specialists whispered in clusters. Denise moved like a storm, efficient and sharp. "It's not a hack," she reported. "It's access, someone with credentials, old credentials." Elijah's jaw tightened. "Caleb's." Denise nodded. "He set time-delayed permissions years ago, sleeping keys." The damage was not explosive. It was surgical. Supply orders rerouted. Minor discrepancies introduced into logistics software, just enough to cause confusion, delays, doubt. If left unchecked, it would make Kingsbridge look incompetent. Elijah called an emergency lockdown. No emails out, no data in. Some managers protested. "This will scare clients." Elijah replied calmly, "So will silence when trucks don't arrive." For 48 hours, Kingsbridge worked in controlled chaos. Teams slept on couches. Coffee ran out. People argued, cried, solved problems, failed, tried again. Elijah stayed visible. He moved from floor to floor, asked questions, listened, ate what everyone else ate. It reminded many employees of the stories they'd heard about him before he disappeared. By the 3rd day, the tunnel was sealed. Caleb's access was erased. But the consequences had already begun. A major agricultural delivery failed to arrive in rural Alabama. Farmers waited. Crops suffered. Phones rang off the hook. A local news crew arrived. Elijah went to Alabama himself. He stood in the dust with farmers whose hands were cracked from work, whose voices were tired. "This delay cost us," one man said. "We trusted you." Elijah nodded. "You were right, too." He did not deflect. He did not blame sabotage. Instead, he promised compensation. Not paperwork, not later. Immediate relief. The farmers watched him carefully. Then one woman said, "You're that man they slapped." Elijah smiled faintly. "Yes." She studied him. "My daddy used to say, 'Watch how a man treats dirt. That tells you who he is.'" Word spread. Slowly, painfully, Kingsbridge regained ground. But Caleb was not finished. A sealed envelope arrived at Elijah's home one evening. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. Elijah, years earlier, shaking hands with a man now imprisoned for fraud. A note followed. You kept bad company once. How long before they believe you did again? Denise read it silently. He's threatening your legacy. Elijah folded the note carefully. He's afraid of it. The next day, Elijah received a subpoena. Not for Kingsbridge. For himself. Personal testimony, old dealings, old failures. The media circled like vultures. Friends advised him to step back. Let the lawyers handle it. Elijah refused. If I hid once, he said, I won't hide again. At the hearing, Elijah answered every question. Yes, he had trusted the wrong people. Yes, he had failed to see corruption early. No, he had never stolen, laundered, or bribed. His honesty disarmed even hostile examiners. Outside, cameras flashed. Someone shouted, "Why pretend to be a groundskeeper?" Elijah stopped. Because, he said simply, truth walks past you every day. You just have to stop looking up to see it. That clip went viral. Caleb's pressure campaign faltered. But desperation sharpens cruelty. One night, Denise called Elijah at home, her voice shaking. They've turned Marcus, she said. He's agreed to testify. Elijah closed his eyes. Against who? He asked. Denise hesitated. Against you. Silence filled the line. Marcus Hale, humiliated, furious, eager to survive. A man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous. Elijah sat down heavily. What does Marcus claim? He asked. Denise exhaled. That you orchestrated everything, that the disguise was manipulation, that you provoked him. Elijah stared at the dark window. Outside, the city lights flickered. For the first time since the slap, doubt crept in. Not in himself. In how far this would go. Because if Marcus's lie took hold, Elijah would not just lose Kingsbridge. He would become the villain of his own story. And Caleb knew it. Somewhere, Caleb smiled again and prepared his final move. The hearing room was colder than Elijah expected. Not from air conditioning, but from tension. Marcus Hale sat at the far end of the table in a gray suit that looked borrowed. Gone was the sharp confidence, the loud laugh. His eyes darted constantly, avoiding Elijah's face. Cameras lined the walls. Reporters whispered. Every word spoken here would be carried far beyond the room. Marcus cleared his throat. I was manipulated, he said. The so-called CEO created a scenario to humiliate me. He pretended to be powerless to provoke a reaction. A murmur rippled through the room. Elijah sat still. Marcus continued, voice growing stronger. He wanted a villain, I became convenient. The examiner turned to Elijah. Mr. Moore, your response. Elijah leaned forward slightly. I never told Marcus Hale to strike me. I never told him to insult anyone. I gave him nothing but my silence. Marcus laughed nervously. You expect us to believe that? Elijah met his eyes for the first time. Marcus, when I pushed that wheelbarrow, what did I say to you? Marcus froze. You don't remember, Elijah said calmly. Because I said nothing, you did all the talking. The examiner raised a hand. Mr. Hale. Marcus swallowed. He was in the way. Elijah nodded, and that justified violence. Silence. The hearing stretched for hours. Emails were read, timelines examined, testimonies played. Then Denise stood. With permission, she said, I'd like to submit additional evidence. She pressed a button. A video played on the screen. Security footage. Marcus, weeks before the gala, mocking staff, shoving a cleaner's cart aside, threatening an intern's job for speaking up. The room stiffened. This footage, Denise continued, was recorded long before Mr. Moore's reveal. There was no provocation, only pattern. Marcus's lawyer objected. The examiner waved him down. Elijah spoke softly. Marcus is not a monster. He is a mirror. He reflects what systems allow. Marcus exploded. You're blaming me for your experiment. Elijah shook his head. No, I'm blaming myself for not stopping you sooner. The hearing concluded with no verdict that day. But outside, public opinion shifted again. Not in favor of perfection. In favor of accountability. That night, Elijah returned to the Kingsbridge estate. The same lawn, the same trees. He stood where the slap had happened. A young groundskeeper approached, nervous. Sir, they say you don't fire people who make mistakes. Elijah smiled gently. I fire people who refuse to learn. The young man nodded and walked away. Denise joined Elijah. Caleb is running out of options. Elijah replied, that's when men like him do the most damage. As if summoned by the words, Elijah's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. A familiar voice spoke, calm and poisonous. You taught me well, Elijah. Strip everything to reveal truth. Elijah's jaw tightened. You should have listened to the lesson. Caleb chuckled. I did, which is why tomorrow Kingsbridge loses its biggest contract. The line went dead. Denise looked alarmed. Which one? Elijah stared at the dark horizon. The water infrastructure project. Denise gasped. That serves millions. Elijah nodded slowly. Then this isn't about money anymore. By morning, the news broke. The contract was suspended due to ethical uncertainty. Stock prices plunged. Employees panicked. Elijah called another town hall. He stood before them, tired but steady. This is the cost of truth, he said, and I won't lie to you about that. Someone shouted, Are we going to lose our jobs? Elijah answered honestly. Some roles may change, but no one will be discarded like they don't matter. Silence held. Then applause. Not loud. Resolved. Later that day, an envelope arrived at Kingsbridge headquarters. Inside was a single flash drive. No note. Denise ran a scan. Her face went pale. It's a backup, she whispered. Everything Caleb hid, every transfer, every partner, every threat. Elijah closed his eyes briefly. Then it's time, he said. But as Denise reached for the phone, alarms blared through the building. Red lights flashed. A security officer burst in. Sir, we have a situation. Someone's trying to force entry into the server vault. Elijah stood. Outside, sirens wailed again. History repeating itself. But this time, Elijah was not in disguise. And he was done waiting. Before the next chapter unfolds, this is a moment to pause and hear from you. If this story is keeping you on edge, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. Also, what would you do if telling the truth started costing innocent people their jobs and safety? Have you ever seen power push back this hard when exposed? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. The server vault doors trembled under the force of the impact. Metal groaned, alarms screamed, red lights painted the hallway in warning. Elijah moved fast. Lock down the East Wing, he ordered. Call Federal Cybercrime and Internal Affairs, now. Security scattered. Denise stayed close, gripping the flash drive like it might disappear. This isn't a smash and grab, she said. They're too precise. Elijah nodded. They want one thing. The truth. The attackers didn't get far. By the time authorities arrived, 2 men were on the floor, restrained. A third had fled. All wore maintenance uniforms that did not belong to Kingsbridge. Inside one of their bags was a burner phone. And a badge with Caleb Wright's old access code. The message was clear. Caleb was no longer hiding. Within hours, the story broke. Attempted corporate espionage at Kingsbridge. Whistleblower files targeted in late-night breach. Public sympathy surged. But Caleb made his final move anyway. At noon the next day, his lawyers released a statement. Caleb Wright accused Elijah Moore of orchestrating a long-term deception. Claiming Elijah's disguise invalidated all internal findings and violated employee trust. It was bold and desperate. The board split again. Emergency calls, closed-door meetings, fear returned. Denise confronted Elijah privately. If they vote now, you could lose control. Elijah looked at the flash drive. Then we make sure they can't. He scheduled a press conference. Live. No filters. No delays. The room filled with journalists. Cameras rolled. Elijah stepped forward. I pretended to be invisible, he began, not to trick anyone but to listen. He held up the flash drive. This contains evidence of financial crimes, coercion, and sabotage, not opinions, facts. A reporter shouted, "Why not release it all now?" Elijah replied, "Because truth without order becomes noise, and noise is how corruption hides." Then he did something unexpected. He invited the groundskeepers, cleaners, interns, and junior staff onto the stage. They stood behind him. "This is who I answer to," Elijah said, "not just shareholders." The image went everywhere. Caleb's allies panicked. 2 resigned within hours. 1 turned state's evidence. By evening, warrants were issued. Caleb Wright was arrested in a quiet suburb outside Atlanta. Cameras caught him being led away, face tight, eyes burning. Elijah watched the footage alone. Denise asked softly, "Do you feel vindicated?" Elijah shook his head. "I feel responsible." With Caleb in custody, the water infrastructure contract was reviewed again. This time, the investigators saw the full picture. The suspension was lifted. Work resumed. Relief swept through Kingsbridge. But the story was not over. Marcus Hale's testimony collapsed under cross-examination. His deal was revoked. Charges followed. One by one, the old system fell apart. Weeks passed. Kingsbridge stabilized. New leadership programs were launched. Ethics councils formed. Whistleblower protections strengthened. Elijah did not celebrate. Instead, he returned to the grounds one morning. He wore the overalls again. Not as disguise. As reminder. A young intern approached him. "Sir, why do you still do that?" Elijah smiled. "So I never forget where the cracks form first." Denise joined him with news. "The board wants to honor you. Statue, building name, the works." Elijah chuckled. "Tell them no." He looked across the lawn. Honor the people who kept this place alive while no one was looking. As the sun rose, Elijah knew the battle was ending. But legacies are not declared. They are lived. And the final chapter of Kingsbridge was still being written. The only question left was whether the world had truly learned the lesson, or whether it would forget again. Soon. Time changed the noise, but not the weight. 3 months after Caleb Wright's arrest, Kingsbridge no longer felt like a company recovering from a scandal. It felt like a place relearning how to breathe. The headlines faded. The cameras moved on. Stock prices stabilized. New contracts replaced the old ones. On paper, everything looked healed. But Elijah knew better. Culture does not reset because a villain is removed. It reshapes slowly, through habits, through choices made when no one is watching. That was why Elijah refused to retreat back into a corner office. He moved through Kingsbridge openly now, without security trailing him. He sat in on junior meetings, ate in the common cafeteria, asked questions that made people uncomfortable, then listened long enough to make them feel safe answering. Some executives left on their own. They said they didn't fit the new direction. Elijah let them go without bitterness. Others stayed and struggled. One afternoon, a senior manager named Leonard came to Elijah's office, eyes tired. "I won't lie," Leonard said. "This new transparency, it scares people." Elijah nodded. "It should. Growth without fear is usually vanity." Leonard hesitated. "Do you ever regret it, the disguise, the fallout?" Elijah looked out the window at the grounds below. Fresh grass, New hands working. I regret not doing it sooner, he said. Outside Kingsbridge, the ripple spread. Other companies began quiet audits. Anonymous tips increased across industries. Employees shared the story of the groundskeeper CEO like a modern folktale, passed from break rooms to barber shops, from offices in Atlanta to farms in Mississippi, from Lagos to Detroit. Some told it wrong. They said Elijah was testing people. He hated that version. He had not tested anyone. He had simply watched them be themselves. One evening, Elijah received a letter written by hand. It was from the catering woman who had cried during the gala. She wrote about how she had almost quit that night, how being seen had changed her, how she was now supervising her own team. At the bottom, she wrote, "Thank you for seeing us before we learned to disappear." Elijah folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer. Not as pride, as warning. The trial began quietly. Caleb Wright sat in court thinner, grayer, his confidence stripped away piece by piece. Evidence piled high. Shell companies, recorded calls, bribes disguised as consulting fees. Marcus Hale testified again, this time without swagger. His voice cracked when confronted with his own words. The judge listened. The jury watched. The verdict, when it came, was swift. Guilty. Caleb was sentenced to years that would outlast his relevance. Marcus received a reduced sentence, but his career was over. No speeches followed. No celebrations. Justice did not feel loud. It felt heavy. The board urged Elijah to finally rest. "You've carried this long enough," one member said. "Let the system run." Elijah smiled politely. Then he proposed something radical. A permanent rotation. Every executive, including himself, would spend 2 weeks a year working entry-level roles. Groundskeeping, cleaning, customer service, logistics. No exceptions. No press. The room erupted in debate. Investors hesitated. Then one asked a simple question. "Will you do it too?" Elijah nodded. First. The vote passed. Reluctantly. Months later, Elijah stood beside a young man repairing irrigation lines on the Kingsbridge estate. The sun was hot, the work was slow. The young man wiped his brow. "You know, sir, people still talk about that slap." Elijah nodded. "They should." The young man laughed softly. "Hard to believe they treated you like nothing." Elijah looked at the earth beneath their feet. "It's easier than you think." A pause. Then the young man asked, "Do you think people really change?" Elijah considered the question carefully. "People change when consequences meet conscience," he said. "Otherwise, they just adapt." That evening, Elijah walked alone again. The estate was quiet, lights low, wind moving gently through trees that had witnessed humiliation, revelation, and repair. He stopped at the exact spot where Marcus had raised his hand. There was no mark left on the grass. Only memory. Elijah knelt and pressed his palm to the ground. Not in anger. In gratitude. Because the earth had held him when power did not. As he stood, Denise approached with one final report. "Kingsbridge is being studied now," she said. "Business schools, ethics boards, governments." Elijah sighed. "Then we must be careful." Denise smiled faintly. "You already are." Elijah looked once more at the grounds. "Stories like this," he said, "are not warnings, they are mirrors." And as he walked back toward the light, the question lingered quietly in the air, unanswered. Had the world truly learned to look down before looking up? Or was it only waiting for the next man in overalls to be ignored? The sentence came down on a quiet Thursday morning. No cameras, no crowd. Caleb Wright stood as the judge read the final words, his hands clenched, his face hollow. When it was over, he did not look back. He was led away like any other man who had mistaken control for permanence. Outside the courthouse, the world kept moving. Traffic flowed, people laughed, life did not pause for justice. Elijah watched from a distance, not as a victor but as a witness. Denise stood beside him, silent. "It's finished," she said at last. Elijah shook his head gently. "It's concluded, that's different." They returned to Kingsbridge the same day. No announcements were made, no celebrations planned. Elijah requested that work continue as normal. That was how real endings happened. In the weeks that followed, Kingsbridge became quieter in a way Elijah appreciated. Fewer speeches, fewer empty promises, more listening. The rotation program began. Executives struggled. Some complained quietly, others openly. One vice president quit after a week cleaning loading bays. Another broke down after spending a day answering customer service calls, hearing frustration she had never allowed to reach her office before. A few stayed. Those were the ones Elijah watched closely. One morning, Marcus Hale's name appeared again in the news. Sentenced, no appeals left. The article was short, almost forgettable. Elijah read it once and closed it. Marcus had made his choices. Elijah returned his attention to the living. At the estate, the grounds looked better than they ever had. Not because of new equipment or stricter oversight, but because people cared again. They spoke to one another. They corrected mistakes without fear. One afternoon, Elijah noticed a young cleaner arguing with a supervisor. He did not intervene immediately. He watched. The supervisor paused, took a breath, and said, "You're right. Let's fix it together." Elijah smiled to himself. That was the real victory. Months later, Kingsbridge hosted another gala. Smaller, simpler. No grand speeches, no ego-driven displays. Elijah insisted on one condition. No VIP entrances. Everyone walked through the same doors. Some guests found it strange, others uncomfortable. Elijah did not explain. During the event, a young boy wandered near the lawn, staring at the fountain. His mother hurried after him, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "He just likes watching people work." Elijah knelt beside the boy. "Do you like this place?" The boy nodded. "The man who cuts the grass talks to me." Elijah chuckled softly. "He's a good man." The mother looked confused. "You know him?" Elijah stood. "Very well." Later that night, as music played low and conversations drifted, Elijah stepped outside alone. The same sky, the same trees. Different air. Denise joined him with a tablet. "Final reports are in. Profit is steady. Turnover is down. Trust metrics are unusual." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Unusual how?" She smiled. "People believe us." Elijah exhaled slowly. Belief was fragile. It had to be earned every day. Before the night ended, Elijah was asked one last question by a journalist who had waited patiently at the edge of the crowd. "Mr. Moore," the journalist said, "what do you want this story to be remembered as?" Elijah considered the question carefully. "Not a scandal," he said, "not a triumph." The journalist waited. "A reminder," Elijah continued. "That power does not reveal character, it removes excuses." The article ran the next morning. It did not go viral. Elijah was glad. Years passed. Kingsbridge grew, but not recklessly. Elijah trained successors slowly, deliberately. He stepped back again, this time without disappearing. On his last official day as CEO, there was no ceremony. He walked the grounds one final time in his old overalls. Some recognized him. Some didn't. That felt right. At the edge of the lawn, a new groundskeeper struggled with a stuck wheelbarrow. Elijah approached and helped him lift it free. "Thank you," the man said, surprised. Elijah nodded. "You're welcome." As he walked away, the man turned to another worker. "Nice old guy." Elijah smiled. Years later, people would still tell the story. They would say a groundskeeper was slapped and turned out to be the CEO. Some would laugh. Some would shake their heads. A few would pause, look around, and wonder who else they were overlooking. That was the real ending. Not the fall of a man like Marcus. Not the punishment of a man like Caleb. But the quiet shift in how people looked at those they once treated like nothing. And somewhere beneath the grass of a well-kept estate, the ground remembered it all. Before we close this story, take a moment to reflect. If this folktale moved you or made you think differently about power, respect, or the people around you, support the channel by liking this video and subscribing for more stories like this. Share it with someone who needs the reminder. And tell us in the comments, what is the biggest lesson you're taking away from Elijah's story, and where are you watching from today?